In my 35 years on the bench here in Providence, Rhode Island, I've learned that respect is the foundation of justice. Without it, we have nothing. And I'll tell you something right now, before we go any further with this story. If you believe that everyone who enters a courtroom deserves to be treated with dignity, hit that like button and subscribe to this channel, because what I'm about to share with you will restore your faith in how the system is supposed to work. What happened on this particular morning tested everything I believe about fairness, about humility, and about what happens when someone in a position of authority forgets that justice doesn't play favorites. I'm Judge Frank Caprio, and this is a story about the day an officer laughed at justice in my courtroom and how justice, as it always does, had the last word. It started like any other Wednesday morning. I had my coffee, said my prayers, kissed my wife goodbye, and headed to the courthouse. Inspector Quinn was already there, organizing the docket, and we exchanged our usual pleasantries. He's been with me for years, that man, and I trust his instincts about people. When he handed me the morning's cases, he paused on one particular file. He didn't say anything, but I saw something in his eyes. A warning, maybe, or concern. The case involved a parking violation, nothing extraordinary on the surface. A woman named Rosa Martinez had received 3 tickets over the course of 2 months, all near Rhode Island Hospital. The fines had accumulated to $470. What caught my attention was a note from the prosecuting officer requesting the maximum penalty and additional court fees. That alone was unusual for parking violations. Rosa walked into my courtroom with her head down, clutching a worn purse against her chest like it might protect her from what was coming. She was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair pulled back and hands that showed a lifetime of hard work. Behind her walked Officer Dennison, the ticketing officer who'd requested to be present. Now, let me tell you something about my courtroom. Officers don't usually attend parking violation hearings unless there's something unusual involved. I could see he was young, maybe late 20s, with that swagger some officers develop when they forget their public servants first. He took his position near the prosecutor's table and crossed his arms, watching Rosa like she was some kind of criminal mastermind instead of an elderly woman terrified of being in court. I looked at Rosa and softened my voice the way I always do when I see someone afraid. I said, "Good morning, ma'am. I'm Judge Caprio. Don't be nervous. We're just here to understand what happened, okay?" She nodded but didn't look up. I could see her hands trembling. That's when Officer Dennison let out a small chuckle. It wasn't loud, but in the quiet of my courtroom I heard it clearly. So did Inspector Quinn. So did everyone present. I looked at the officer, and I saw something in his expression that troubled me deeply. Amusement, contempt even, like this was all some kind of joke to him. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've developed a sense about these things. Something wasn't right here. I turned back to Rosa and asked her to tell me about these parking tickets. She spoke so quietly I had to lean forward to hear her. She said, her voice breaking, "Your Honor, my husband, he was in the hospital. He had a stroke. I parked where I could find a spot because I needed to get to him quickly." I asked her which hospital, though I already knew from the ticket locations. She said Rhode Island Hospital. I asked how her husband was doing now, and she paused. Her eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "He passed away 6 weeks ago, Your Honor." The courtroom went completely silent. I felt my chest tighten the way it does when someone's pain becomes real and immediate in front of you. I thought of my own health challenges, my own mortality, how precious every moment with our loved ones truly is. And in that sacred silence, Officer Dennison laughed again. This time it was louder, more deliberate. He actually laughed at this woman's grief. I saw red, my friends. I'm not a man who loses his temper easily. My father taught me that anger without purpose is just noise. But what I felt in that moment was righteous indignation. Before I tell you what I did next, I need you to share this video with someone who needs to see that justice still matters, that dignity still matters, that treating people right still matters in this world. I turned to Officer Dennison and I said in a voice that carried every ounce of my 35 years of authority, "Officer, did I hear you correctly? Did you just laugh?" He straightened up, realizing perhaps for the first time that he'd made a serious mistake. He said, "Your Honor, I just thought it was ironic that she claims she couldn't find parking when there's a parking garage right there." Ironic. He used that word about a woman losing her husband. I let the silence stretch for a moment. I wanted him to hear his own words hanging in the air. Then I said, "Let me ask you something, officer. Have you ever had someone you love dying in a hospital? Have you ever been so terrified and desperate that you couldn't think straight, that you just needed to get to them before it was too late?" His face changed. The smugness drained away. He said, "No, Your Honor." I nodded slowly. I said, "Then let me tell you what that's like. because I have. When someone you love is dying, you're not thinking about parking garages. You're not thinking about meters or zones or regulations. You're thinking, please God, let me get there in time. Let me hold their hand. Let me tell them I love them one more time. That's what you're thinking. I could see Rosa crying openly now, and several people in the gallery were wiping their eyes. Inspector Quinn was watching me with that expression he gets when he knows something important is happening. I turned to Rosa and asked her gently if she had the hospital records showing her husband's admission dates. She nodded and pulled out a folder from her purse with shaking hands. Her daughter, who I hadn't noticed before in the back of the courtroom, came forward to help her. The daughter handed me the documents, and I saw everything I needed to see. Admission date, stroke diagnosis, intensive care, the timeline of decline, and finally, the death certificate. Every single parking ticket corresponded exactly with critical days in her husband's hospitalization. The day of his stroke, the day he was moved to ICU, the day before he died. I looked at these documents, and I looked at this woman who had spent her final weeks with her husband of probably 40 years, parking wherever she could find a spot because love doesn't wait for convenient parking. And then I looked at Officer Dennison, who had ticketed her each time without asking a single question, without showing an ounce of human compassion, and who had come to my courtroom today expecting to see her punished to the maximum extent. What am I going to do with this situation? That's what I was thinking. How do I turn this into a teaching moment, not just for this officer, but for everyone watching? I said to Officer Dennison, "Come forward, please." He approached the bench, and I could see he was nervous now. Good, he should be. I said, keeping my voice level but firm, "Officer, do you know why I asked you to approach?" He shook his head. I continued, "Because I want you to look at Mrs. Martinez. Really look at her. She's not a criminal. She's not someone trying to cheat the system. She's a widow who was trying to be with her dying husband. Do you understand the difference?" He nodded, and I saw his jaw tighten. Maybe with shame, maybe with defensiveness. I wasn't done. I said, "Well, when you put on that uniform every morning, you're not just enforcing rules. You're representing justice itself. And justice without compassion isn't justice at all. It's just cruelty wrapped in a badge." I let those words sink in. Then I said something I've said 1,000 times in my courtroom because it's at the heart of everything I believe. I try to treat people the way I'd want to be treated. If that was your mother standing there, officer, having just lost your father, would you want her treated with compassion, or would you want someone laughing at her pain? His voice was barely a whisper when he said, "With compassion, Your Honor." I nodded. I said, "Then that's how we're going to proceed here today." Before I reveal what I decided to do, I want you to hit that subscribe button if you believe our justice system should be built on empathy and understanding, not just rules and regulations. These stories matter because they remind us what's possible when we lead with our hearts. Now, here's what happened next. I looked at the citation amounts, and I looked at Rosa's face, and I thought about my own immigrant parents who came to this country with nothing. My father worked himself to exhaustion to give us a better life. He taught me that dignity isn't something you earn. It's something every human being deserves simply because they exist. Rosa reminded me of my mother, who would have done exactly the same thing, parked anywhere she needed to be with someone she loved. I said to Rosa, "Ma'am, I'm dismissing all of these tickets, every single one." I heard her gasp. Her daughter let out a small cry of relief. I continued, "You owed nothing then, and you owe nothing now. You were being a devoted wife in the most difficult moment of your life. This court honors that devotion." Rosa began crying in earnest, and she said, "Thank you, Your Honor. God bless you. Thank you." Those words, "God bless you," they're words I say often, but hearing them from her in that moment meant everything to me. But I wasn't finished yet, not by a long shot. I turned back to Officer Dennison and I said, "Officer, I'm going to do something unusual now. I'm going to require you to complete 20 hours of community service." His eyes widened in shock. The prosecutor looked surprised too. I explained, "Not as punishment, but as education. You're going to volunteer at Rhode Island Hospital in the family waiting area. You're going to sit with families who are going through what Mrs. Martinez went through. You're going to see their faces, hear their stories, understand their pain. And then maybe, just maybe, the next time you're about to write a ticket, you'll ask yourself if there might be more to the story." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Officer Dennison's face had gone through several emotions: shock, embarrassment, and finally, something that looked like understanding. He said, "Yes, Your Honor, I'll do it." I nodded and said, "I believe you will, and I believe you'll be a better officer for it." Then I said something I meant with my whole heart. "You're young. You have a whole career ahead of you. You can choose to be the kind of officer who sees people as problems to be solved, or you can be the kind who sees them as human beings who deserve dignity. The choice is yours, but I'm giving you the opportunity to learn the difference." Inspector Quinn was nodding slightly. I could see approval in his eyes. The prosecutor didn't object. How could he? This was justice in its truest form. Not the letter of the law, but the spirit of it. I asked Rosa if she needed anything else, any other support, and her daughter spoke up. She said, "Your Honor, my mother's been so worried about these tickets. She hasn't been sleeping. She was terrified she'd end up in jail." My heart broke a little more. I said, "Rosa, look at me. You're not going to jail. You're going home. You're going to grieve your husband properly, without this burden. And I want you to remember something. Your husband would be proud of you for fighting through this, for showing up here today, even though you were afraid. That takes courage." She nodded, wiping her tears, and said, "He was a good man. 42 years we were married." I smiled at her and said, 42 years. That's a blessing. That's a lifetime of love. No parking ticket could ever diminish that." I dismissed them both, Rosa and her daughter, and watched as they left the courtroom. The daughter had her arm around her mother, and I could see Rosa's shoulders had relaxed, like a weight had been lifted. That's what justice should do. It should lift weights, not add them. After they left, I called a brief recess. Inspector Quinn approached the bench and said quietly, "Judge, that was something special." I shook my head and said, "It was just common sense and common decency. But thank you, my friend." He smiled and went back to prepare for the next case. I sat there for a moment, thinking about what had just transpired. That officer came into my courtroom thinking he'd see an elderly immigrant woman fined and penalized. He laughed because he thought justice was on his side. But he learned something today. He learned that justice doesn't belong to the powerful. It belongs to the people who deserve compassion and fairness. Let me tell you something, my friends, and I need you to really hear this. Comment below if you agree with what I'm about to say. The badge doesn't make you superior to the people you serve. The robe doesn't make me better than the people who stand before me. These are symbols of responsibility, not superiority. When we forget that, when we start thinking we're above the people we're meant to serve, that's when the system breaks down. That's when justice becomes a joke. And I won't allow that in my courtroom, not ever. About 3 months after this case, I received a letter at the courthouse. It was from Officer Dennison. He wrote to tell me that he'd completed his community service hours at the hospital, but he'd continued volunteering even after he'd fulfilled his requirement. He wrote, "Judge Caprio, I met families going through the worst days of their lives. I met a father whose son was in a car accident. I met a woman whose mother had cancer. I met people who reminded me why I became a police officer in the first place. To help people, not to add to their suffering. Thank you for teaching me what my academy training didn't. Thank you for showing me that mercy and justice aren't opposites. They're partners." I read that letter 3 times. I showed it to my wife and she cried. I showed it to Inspector Quinn and he smiled that knowing smile of his. That letter meant more to me than 1,000 legal victories because it meant that young officer got it. He understood. He transformed from someone who laughed at pain into someone who recognized it and wanted to help ease it. That's the kind of change that ripples outward. Every person he encounters from now on will benefit from what he learned in those hospital waiting rooms. Rosa's daughter also reached out to me through the court staff. She sent a message saying her mother talked about that day constantly, telling everyone about the judge who showed her kindness when she expected only judgment. She said Rosa kept my picture from the news on her refrigerator, and whenever she felt alone, she remembered that there were still good people in the world who cared about doing the right thing. I'm not sharing this to boast. God knows I'm far from perfect. I'm sharing it because it illustrates something vital. The decisions we make in moments of power define who we are. How we treat people when we have authority over them reveals our true character. I think about my father often, especially in moments like these. He came to America with nothing but hope and a willingness to work hard. He faced discrimination, struggled to provide for his family, but he never lost his dignity or his belief that people were fundamentally good. He taught me that everyone has a story, and if you take the time to listen, you'll find that most people are doing the best they can with what they have. Rosa was doing her best. She was loving her husband until his final breath, and she parked illegally to do it. Should we punish love? Should we find devotion? What kind of society would we be if we did? The officer who laughed learned that justice isn't about feeling superior. It's about recognizing that any of us could be the person standing in that courtroom, desperate and afraid. It's about understanding that the measure of a civilized society is how it treats people in their most vulnerable moments. Do we kick them when they're down, or do we extend a hand and help them back up? I've always believed in the latter. It's how I was raised. It's what my faith teaches me. It's what my 35 years on this bench have confirmed time and time again. If you've watched this far, I want you to do something for me. I want you to share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that compassion still exists in our world. Share it with someone who works in law enforcement, in the courts, in any position of authority over others. Share it with someone who's lost hope in the system. And tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment where someone in power showed you unexpected kindness? Or have you been that person for someone else? I read these comments and your stories inspire me to keep doing what I do. Here's what I want you to take away from this. Justice laughed back not because I punished that officer harshly, but because I gave him the opportunity to become better. Real justice isn't about revenge or humiliation. It's about restoration, education, and transformation. That officer walked out of my courtroom changed. Rosa walked out unburdened. And everyone who witnessed it, including all of you watching now, was reminded that the system can work the way it's supposed to, when the people operating it remember their humanity. I'm 87 years old now, and I've been blessed with a long life and a career that's given me purpose. I've faced my own health challenges, my own moments of vulnerability. Those experiences taught me that we're all just one crisis away from needing someone's compassion. We're all one tragedy away from being the person in that courtroom, hoping for understanding. When I see someone standing before me, I don't see a case number or a violation. I see a person, a son, a daughter, a parent, a spouse. Someone's whole world, and I treat them accordingly. The day that officer laughed at justice was the day justice taught him, and all of us, its most important lesson. You can have all the authority in the world, all the power, all the badges and uniforms and titles, but none of it means anything if you've lost your compassion. None of it matters if you've forgotten that the people you serve are human beings who deserve dignity and respect. Justice laughed back by transforming mockery into meaning, by turning contempt into compassion, by showing that the arc of the moral universe really does bend toward justice when good people refuse to let it bend any other way. Before we end today, I want to leave you with this thought. Every single day you encounter people who are fighting battles you know nothing about. The person who cut you off in traffic might be rushing to the hospital. The cashier who seems rude might have just gotten devastating news. The co-worker who's short-tempered might be dealing with something unbearable at home. We don't know, we can't know, but we can choose to respond with grace anyway. We can choose to be kind even when we don't have to be. We can choose to be the person who makes someone's terrible day just a little bit better. That's what I tried to do for Rosa. That's what I try to do every single day in my courtroom. And that's what I'm asking you to do in your own lives, whatever your courtroom might be. Your workplace, your home, your community. Be the person who shows up with compassion. Be the person who asks questions before making judgments. Be the person who remembers that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Do that, and you'll never be the person who laughs at someone's pain. You'll be the person who helps heal it. God bless you all. Take care of yourselves and each other. And remember, justice doesn't play favorites, but it does have a preference. It prefers mercy, kindness, and love, always. If this story moved you, hit that like button one more time, subscribe to see more stories from my courtroom, and tell me in the comments what you would have done in this situation. I'll see you in the next one, my friends. But nothing prepared me for what walked into my courtroom next, a case that would challenge everything I thought I knew about forgiveness.